Hello, good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here at Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C Stewart and I hate to be the one that disappoints you, but tonight all you've got is me. But stay with us because there is a large amount of news to get through. Plenty of acronyms tonight. We've got DUPs, METs, MUPs, ERGs and a final cabinet meeting alongside benefit gaps, carbon footprints and Scottish learning hours. But internationally, we're also going to be talking the United States, Rwanda, and where we always begin, which is, of course, the Ukrainian update on day 391 of the conflict in Ukraine. And reports today that Russian cruise missiles intended for use by Moscow's Black Sea Fleet have been destroyed in an explosion in the city of Zankow in the north of the Crimean Peninsula, according to the Ukraine's defence ministry. Vladimir Putin and President Xi Jinping are holding a second set of talks today. The Chinese president's trip to Moscow has been viewed as a major boost for his strategic partner, Vladimir Putin. The Chinese leader is expected to continue to position himself as a potential peacemaker in the Ukraine war during his two-day visit to Russia, which is his first state visit since Putin's invasion. President Xi also met Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin this morning and invited both Mishustin and Putin to visit China later this year. China's state media has extensively and positively covered the visit. Most coverage has, of course, been focused on Xi's comments and talking about how strong the relationship is between the two. None of the pieces, of course, mentioned the recent ICC arrest warrant for the Russian president over alleged war crimes committed in the Ukraine. The United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken criticised President Xi on Monday for providing diplomatic cover for Russia to continue committing war crimes. And Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has arrived for talks with President Zelensky. Kishida and Zelensky are expected to discuss Japanese support for the reconstruction of Ukraine. Kishida, who is to chair the Group of Seven summit in May, was the only G7 leader who hadn't visited Ukraine and was under pressure to do so at home. Japan has continued to import Russian timber worth of $414 million since the start of the war in the Ukraine, according to a London-based non-governmental organisation, which has accused Tokyo of helping to bankroll Putin's bloody war, despite joining other countries in imposing certain sanctions on the Kremlin. Irina Vereshchuk, who is one of Ukraine's deputy prime ministers and is the Minister of Reintegration of Temporarily Occupied Territories, has said there is no confirmed time agreed for a mooted call between Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and President Xi. Ukraine is holding its defence of the besieged eastern city of Bakhmut as Russian forces attempted to advance to the city centre, a Ukrainian general was reported as saying today. There was intense fighting along the eastern front line, he confirmed. And from Ukraine we come closer to home, as today was the very day that Nicola Sturgeon chaired her final cabinet meeting. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, alongside Deputy First Minister John Sweeney, ahead of both standing down next week from government, were in attendance today at that cabinet meeting. As well as the substantive business of cabinet being discussed, cabinet colleagues took time to reflect and pay thanks to the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister, who combined have provided 32 years of service in government. Colleagues paid tribute to both, thanking them for their personal and professional support. Some of the ministerial team around the cabinet table have known each other since the SNP was a minority party, when the idea of a Scottish Parliament, let alone an SNP-led government, was a distant dream. The First Minister said that by her calculation, this was the 637th cabinet under an SNP government. Of all the things that had been discussed around the cabinet table in that time, the First Minister added that one of those of which she was most proud was minimum unit pricing for alcohol MUP. An ambitious policy which took time to become law in the face of parliamentary opposition and legal bids to thwart it, but which, as we will find out in a little while, from a report today published in The Lancet, is saving lives. As well as thanking Cabinet colleagues, the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister also paid tribute to the many civil servants who had helped and supported them over the years. Commenting, a spokesperson for the First Minister said, "Today's Cabinet allowed colleagues to thank the First Minister and Deputy First Minister for their tireless commitment to public service and to making Scotland a better country for all of those who call this nation home." There was no indication of what it is that the First Minister is going to go on and do, although her appearance in Loose Women today or yesterday, I'm not quite sure when it was, may suggest it won't be in any reality TV show, but you might need some wardrobe advice between the two, as she noticed that she appeared in Loose Women and in a resignation speech dressed exactly the same. But on a more serious note, as was commented upon round the Cabinet table, minimum unit pricing policy has, according to a report published today, saved hundreds of lives. This is research which estimates that 156 deaths were averted each year during the implementation of MUP, the minimum unit pricing, and has been welcomed by the Public Health Minister Marie Todd. A Public Health Scotland and University of Glasgow study indicated a 13.4% reduction in deaths and a 4.1% reduction in hospital admissions, wholly attributable to alcohol consumption in the first 2.5 years after MUP was introduced in May 2018. The report also concludes the policy had reduced deaths and hospital admissions where alcohol consumption may have been a factor. Researchers say that they are confident there is a link between the introduction of MUP and the reduction of alcohol health harms. They also noted there had been significant reductions in deaths in areas of deprivation, suggesting that MUP has helped reduce inequalities in alcohol attributable deaths in Scotland. Ms Todd said, "I'm very pleased with these findings, which point to more than 150 lives a year being saved and 411 fewer hospital admissions, further underlining the value of a world-leading minimum unit pricing policy, which has helped reduce alcohol sales to their lowest on record. We are determined to do all we can to reduce alcohol-related harm, which is one of the most pressing public health challenges that we face in Scotland. Minimum unit pricing continues to achieve its aim, cutting overall sales, particularly cheap, high-strength alcohol, which is often drunk by people drinking at harmful levels." And whilst there was perhaps that level of good news up here, then in London, there was something slightly less welcome, though hardly surprising, as once again, the Metropolitan Police have been found to be institutionally racist, misogynistic, and homophobic. The Metropolitan Police is broken and rotting, suffering collapsing public trust, and is guilty of institutional racism, misogyny and homophobia, an official report has stated. The report by Louise Casey, commissioned by the Met after one of its officers abducted Sarah Everard, taking her from a London street in March 2021 before raping and murdering her, is one of the most damning of a major UK institution. In its 363 pages, there are details, disturbing stories of sexual assaults, usually covered up or downplayed, with 12% of women in the Met saying they had been harassed or attacked at work, and 1/3 experiencing sexism. Lady Casey said that the lifeblood of English policing was hemorrhaging, and her report warned that public consent is broken, with just 50% of the public expressing confidence, even before revelations about the force's worst recent scandals. She pinned the primary blame on its past leadership and said, "Public respect has fallen," this from the report, "to a low point. Londoners who do not have confidence in the Met outnumber those who do, and those measures have been lower amongst black Londoners for years. The Met has yet to free itself of institutional racism. Public consent is broken. The Met has become unanchored from the Pelian principle of policing by consent set out when it was established. The reference to Peel, of course, is Sir Robert Peel, who was the Prime Minister and previous Home Secretary, who institutionalised police forces in the UK, hence the fact they were originally called Peelers. So from the very beginning of the police force, it has clearly found the wrong way forward, because the report has found a bullying culture, frontline officers demoralised and feeling let down by their leaders, and discrimination baked into the system, according to the report. Casey even went on to reveal that one Muslim officer had bacon stuffed in his boots, a Sikh officer had his beard cut, minority ethnic officers were more likely to be disciplined or leave, and Britain's biggest force remains disproportionately white in a capital that is increasingly diverse. Stop and search and use of force and powers against black people was excessive, found the report for the Met, which stops more people per head of population than any other force in the country. A catalogue of suffering by women, including frequent abuses by senior officers, including one subjecting a female junior to repeated harassment and an act of indecency. Casey said the Met was failing on so many levels, the crisis is existential, and if not fixed, could end in its dismemberment. Casey said austerity had deprived the Met of £700 million, but the cuts made by the force left its protection of children and women as inadequate. Already crushingly low convictions of rapists were made worse by fridges that housed rape kits being broken or being so full that evidence was lost, cases dropped with rapists going free because of police bungling. Astonishingly, Casey claimed in one instance someone ruined a fridge full of evidence by leaving their lunchbox in it. A potential high-level clash appears to be emerging after Casey's report was published. Well, those who oversee and run the Met have had the report for days. Sir Mark Rowley, the Met's commissioner since September, said he would not use the labels of institutionally racist, institutionally misogynistic, and institutionally homophobic, despite Casey insisting these descriptions are deserved. However, London's Mayor Sadiq Khan, one of the two people who hired him and has the power to fire him, made it clear he agreed with Casey's damning verdicts. And keeping within the United Kingdom, it was news today that in Scotland there are thousands of households who have been hit by the UK government's benefit cap. They are subject to the DWP's, the Department of Work and Pensions benefit cap, which was introduced by the UK government, resulting in households having their social security payments capped at an arbitrary level, which is supposed to be a limit to make benefits lower than a notional income from work. The latest figures show that over 3,000 households had their universal credit cap up to November 2022. Since the cap was introduced, nearly 27,000 households have been subjected to it. SNP MP David Linden has introduced a private members bill which would force the Secretary of State for the Department of Work and Pensions to produce a report into the impact of scrapping the benefit cap. Mr Linden, the SNP's social justice spokesperson, commented, "Tory benefit cap is one of the cruelest policies introduced by the DWP, which limits the support given to some of the lowest income households in the country. During a cost of living crisis made entirely by the Tories, they should be giving a helping hand to households, but instead they are punishing them. The benefit cap has a profound effect on household budgets and forces people to food banks and further into a spiral of poverty. It is a tale of two governments for the people of Scotland, as the Scottish Government is building a social security system built on fairness, dignity and respect. It has introduced support that has been described as game-changing by anti-poverty charities. Plus, the Scottish Government does all it can within its limited powers to mitigate the benefit cap through discretionary housing payments. However, it continues to act with one hand tied behind its back by a Westminster government that is more obsessed with cutting support than giving it to those on the lowest income." And from there, not having the purchase power to have a party, we move to a party or several that apparently were in good faith and nobody meant to mislead anybody. This is, of course, the news today that Boris Johnson has admitted he misled the Commons, but claims he did it in good faith. He said that he would never have dreamed of intentionally misleading the House of Commons over Downing Street gatherings. As he published the defence dossier, he hopes will exonerate him from claims he lied to Parliament. The former Prime Minister admitted he misled the Commons by telling MPs that strict COVID rules and guidance had been followed in Number 10 at all times, but he said his comments were made in good faith. Johnson faces a battle for his future in Parliament after the Cross-Party Privileges Committee found there was significant evidence he had misled MPs over lockdown parties and that he and aides almost certainly knew at the time they were breaking rules. However, in his own written evidence, he suggested there was no smoking gun that indicated he intentionally misled MPs. In its interim report, the committee said the evidence strongly suggests breaches of guidance would have been obvious to the then Prime Minister at the time of the gatherings as he drew up the rules and announced them repeatedly in public. The committee published 4 previously unseen photographs of Downing Street gatherings featuring bottles of alcohol, concluding there had been a culture of drinking that had persisted even as restrictions were put in place. The committee identified at least 4 occasions where Johnson may have misled MPs, including when he told them in December 2021 that no rules nor guidance were broken, even though subsequent investigations by the senior civil servant Sue Gray and the Metropolitan Police found otherwise. Yet much of his defence appears to rely on claims from his senior team that the rules and guidance had not been breached. On the basis of assurances that I received from those with direct knowledge, I honestly believe that these events were lawful work gatherings, he wrote. The defence has been published before a televised hearing tomorrow, Wednesday, in front of the Privileges Committee, which will determine if Johnson misled MPs during multiple questions about the conduct of the Prime Minister and staff that breached lockdown rules during the pandemic. Commenting on Boris Johnson's evidence, the SNP's Westminster Deputy Leader, Mary Black MP, said, "It has taken more than a year, but Boris Johnson has finally admitted what we all knew already, that he lied to Parliament and he lied to the country. Boris Johnson has shown no humility whatsoever for the families who lost loved ones during the pandemic and made incredible sacrifices to protect everyone around them. At the same time, the former Prime Minister was partying away in Downing Street. He is the one who made the rules, but he thought he was above them." And from there on to news today that new rules that have been suggested by the UK government may not get a smooth run through the passage of Parliament that he was hoping. This is news that hardline Tory MPs are to join the Democratic Unionist Party in rejecting Sunak's Northern Ireland Brexit plan. The ERG, or the European Research Group of hardline Brexiteer Conservative MPs, have rejected Rishi Sunak's revised plan for trading arrangements in Northern Ireland, saying it would keep European Union law as supreme. Announcing the decision, Mark Francois, the Tory MP who chairs the group, said its study of the Windsor Framework also found that the apparent veto for Northern Irish politicians over new European regulations was practically useless. Speaking to reporters in Parliament following an ERG meeting, Francois, I hope I pronounced that French name correctly, strongly indicated the group would recommend voting against the plan in the Commons on Wednesday, but said a final decision would be made at another meeting before the debate. The damning verdict increases the potential size of a Tory rebellion against the plan and follows a decision yesterday on Monday by the Democratic Unionist Party to also reject the deal. Leading DUP MP Sammy Wilson said on Tuesday that his party would continue to fight against the plan, also indicating that it could continue the boycott of the Northern Ireland Assembly at Stormont. The ERG remains influential, if not to the same extent as during the Brexit negotiations under Theresa May, and it is not clear how much its view will influence the vote. It does not publish any statistics about its membership. The deal was unveiled last month by Sunak after talks with Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President. The veto on Wednesday will be on one part of the plan, which is the so-called Stormont Brake veto. It will be decided as a statutory instrument, which is a piece of secondary legislation rather than a bill or a formal change to an existing law. And the ERG has produced their own report, a 49-page report by two lawyers affiliated with the group, part of what it styles as its Star Chamber, which came out today. Summarising its findings, François said they had concluded the Stormont Brake was not effective and that the check-free green lane for the bulk of goods moved between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK would not work as had been billed. And from the UK and Northern Ireland, we go more international, as the United States has called conditions in Rwanda's detention centres harsh to life-threatening. USA, UK's closest ally, has criticised Rwanda's dire human rights record, describing conditions in the country's detention centres as harsh to life-threatening. UK Home Secretary Suella Braverman took a group of journalists on a trip last week to reveal details of her £120 million scheme to send all migrants arriving in the UK through irregular means to Rwanda, whether they claim asylum or not. The legality of the scheme, of course, is due to be tested shortly in the UK Court of Appeal. But the United States, in its annual human rights assessment published on Monday, said Rwanda operated a system including harsh and life-threatening prison conditions, arbitrary detention, serious restrictions on free expression, including the imprisonment of journalists, and no effective system of collective bargaining. Suella Braverman has dismissed domestic critics of Rwanda as part of a left-wing blob, but it may be harder to dismiss the documented findings from the UK's closest ally. The Home Office has defended its plan by saying British refugees will be housed in a new 528-home estate in Kahanga on the outskirts of Kigali. The US State Department report passes no judgment on the UK government plans, but the cumulative impact of the report suggests many of the refugees will be deported to a country in which human rights are little better than the countries from which they originally fled. Conditions at prisons and unofficial detention centres range from harsh and life-threatening to approaching international standards. As of July, local civil society organisations reported the country held almost 85,000 detainees in facilities with a capacity total that should be for just over 60,000. Similarly, conditions were generally harsh and life-threatening in unofficial or intelligence service-related detention centres, where individuals suffered from limited access to food, water and healthcare. Conditions were also described as life-threatening in National Rehabilitation Service-operated district transit centres, holding street children, street vendors, suspected drug abusers, persons engaged in commercial sex, homeless persons and suspected petty criminals. Overcrowding was common in police stations and district transit centres. Human rights advocates reported local law enforcement officials regularly cleared the streets of homeless and other needy individuals and subjected them to abusive treatment and unsanitary conditions in transit centres before major international events or conferences happening in the country. The report continues that police killed several people while in custody or while attempting to resist arrest or escape police custody. Observers reported cases of police and military personnel killing individuals suspected of theft. In September, police reportedly killed a man in Gatumba sector for resisting arrest. There were no public reports of investigations into any of these killings. And from Rwanda over to where the report was published, the United States, and some unrest there as New York prepares for it if Donald Trump, former president, is in fact indicted. Law enforcement officials in New York today have continued preparing for possible unrest in the streets of Manhattan as a grand jury investigating Donald Trump over a hush money payment to the adult filmmaker and star Stormy Daniels appeared poised to complete its work by criminally indicting the former president. Barriers were brought to the area around the Manhattan Criminal Courthouse in the lower part of the island. Uniformed police officers were out in force. So were reporters and protesters. People holding placards bearing anti-Trump messages chanted, "No one is above the law." Meanwhile, a lone pro-Trump protester was seen with a sign saying the Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg was funded by George Soros. Last weekend, Trump claimed without offering any evidence he would be arrested today. His representatives later said he was citing media reports and leaks, and there was no indication his prediction would come true. The grand jury did appear to take an important step forward on Monday by hearing testimony for a witness who is known to be favourable to Trump, presumably so prosecutors could ensure the panel had a chance to consider all and any testimony that could be seen as exculpatory. The next steps remain unclear. It was uncertain if additional witnesses might be summoned, but authorities, mindful of the deadly riot by Trump supporters at the US Capitol on the 6th of January 2021, took steps to prepare for any violence that could accompany the unprecedented prosecution of a former president. All New York Police Department officers were expected to be in uniform and ready for deployment, media outlets reported. CNN said law enforcement officials were treating Tuesday as a high alert day, though they had seen no credible threat. And from a credible threat in America, good news today that Scotland's carbon footprint has fallen by 23.6% between 1998 and 2019. In a report by Scotland's chief statistician, which has been published today. The report provides estimates of Scotland's greenhouse gas emissions on a consumption basis. That is, emissions that are associated with the spending of Scottish residents on goods and services wherever in the world these emissions arise, together with emissions directly generated by Scottish households. The key findings of the report, and these are, and I will apologise now, I am no scientist, so you're going to get information which comes with letters rather than explanations, but the key findings of the report, which are very important, between 2018 and 2019, Scotland's carbon footprint, emissions from all greenhouse gases, decreased from 1.3% by 1.3% from 76.9% in 2018 to 75.9 million tonnes carbon dioxide equivalent, which is MTCO2E in 2019. That is million tonnes carbon dioxide equivalent. Between 1998 and 2019, Scotland's carbon footprint fell by 23.6%, the headline that I started with, from 99.3% 99.3 MTCO2E in 1998 to 75.9 MTCO2E equivalent in 2019. I told you I was no scientist. Scotland's carbon footprint rose continuously from 1919 to a peak of 112.4 MTCO2E in 2006 before falling sharply in the following years, coinciding with the recession, and with the exception of 2018, has fallen each subsequent year. The overall reduction between the 2006 peak and 2019 is 32.5%. Now that I've murdered a science story, I go into more familiar ground for me, which is a consultation announced of our school learning hours, which is an exceptionally important part of what the Scottish Government are attempting to do, which is to ask people to share their views on a new legal minimum number of school learning hours. If approved by Parliament, councils will be required by law to provide the equivalent of 25 teaching hours per week in primaries and 27.5 hours per week in secondaries across a school year. Education Secretary Shirley-Ann Somerville announced plans to introduce the measures last month to protect the school week and give parents greater certainty about the number of learning hours their children can expect to receive. The consultation opens today and will run until the 13th of June. Ms Somerville said, "The school week is the backbone of our education provision and benefits all of Scotland's children and young people. We have been clear that any changes to the school week must be based on educational benefits to pupils. Any measures that materially reduce the number of hours children spend learning in school could impact pupil attainment and well-being and undermine our collective efforts to close the poverty-related attainment gap. This is an opportunity for parents, children and young people and everyone else with an interest to make their views known about the potential impact of this policy. And, of course, as always, the urging of everybody to take part of their civic pride and civic society process properly and engage with a consultation of that would be very, very important for all of us. But that's it for this evening. I have come to the end of our run through the various news items that have caught our attention during the course of today. But before I go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So, as we always do, every time we are here, we want to thank everyone who has donated and everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment. Thank you very much. We have made the commitment, not just on the basis of that, but because we believe in it, that our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff here to make more programmes. And if you are on social media, no matter what platform it may be, we would ask you, if you wouldn't mind, tweeting out, finding us on Facebook, telling your friends, in order to build a programme basis that is looking at news from a Scottish perspective and has a little bit of a different slant from that which you would normally get elsewhere, and add to the democratic basis of media for this country. But from me, Donald C Stewart, here at Broadcasting Scotland in Cookadens, it's good night. Thank you for watching.